So when is it okay to take roots while you're out foraging? There's a very common sentiment in this field that taking roots is always bad, no matter what. And quite frankly, that's oftentimes done by people with the best of intentions, but it's just misunderstood. And here's why. Sometimes whenever you're out foraging, you actually need to harvest the root of a plant because that's exactly what we're going for. Let's say, for example, in the case of wild carrot or Queen Anne's lace, we are actually going for the root more often than we are going for the other edible parts like the stem or the seeds or the leaves. Sometimes with the case of spring beauty, we're going for the corms of the plant, which is considered a root type. It's like a root-like organ, but sometimes that's what we're going for. And in those cases, you have to dig up the root. There's no other way around it. There are other plants like garlic mustard, for example, where it's highly invasive where I live here in the United States, and it's best to always pull up the plant by its root, no matter what. So that way you're not killing off other native plants. Sometimes we have plants like echinacea where we're going for the root and the entire above ground portion of the plant, minus the flower of course, for medicine. And so that's another area where it's good to take the entire root as well and take the entire plant. Sometimes we have plants like yarrow, for example, where you can use the leaves and the flowers, and you can even use the stem. The entire above ground section of the plant is usable. So we have a couple of options here. You can basically just pick the leaves and flowers that you need from just a variety of different plants of yarrow within a specific area, or you can just pull up one or two plants total and have all that you're going to need. They're both going to work about the same. But sometimes it can actually be bad to just take a few leaves off of one plant and go and continue taking leaves from the other plants in the area. And here's why. Sometimes whenever you pick a plant leaf, what you're going to actually be causing is an open wound in that plant. That's a guarantee. What is not a guarantee is whether or not pests, disease, fungus, or any other type of malady is going to come in and infect that plant and its local plant population. There are oftentimes there are pests and diseases that thrive on these open wounds that we might create. So in some cases, you very well might be better off just taking the entire plant instead of picking a few leaves off of each one. There are exceptions to this, of course. There's always exceptions with everything, and foraging requires a lot of due diligence by all of us. That due diligence requires us to know which plant we are harvesting and how it's going to work within our local environment. For example, yarrow may be very plentiful in my area, but where you live, it may not be so plentiful. For example, you're not going to find a whole lot of yarrow in the Superstition Mountains of Arizona, for example. Whenever you're foraging any plant at all, no matter what it is, there are three important things to keep in mind. One of those is how many are in the local area. How prevalent is it from the spot that you plan on harvesting from? If you're only finding 5 or 6, please do not harvest it no matter what. Don't even pick a leaf off of it. Just leave the thing alone and find a way more established area. Another thing to keep in mind whenever you're harvesting wild plants is this plant invasive? Because if it's invasive, pull up as much of it as you can find because you're only actually helping the environment. The third thing to keep in mind is what part are we actually after? If we're after the root, obviously you have to take the root. But if we're just after the leaves, or let's say we're after the leaves, stems, and flowers, if you cut a plant down at the ground level, there's a lot of plants that may not grow back. Some of them just flat out won't grow back. Some of them it's going to be a crapshoot. So you kind of have to keep that in mind, and you have to use your due diligence whenever you are foraging to make sure that you are foraging and harvesting responsibly. That can include things like finding out if a plant is endangered or extirpated in your area, or it's threatened within your area. Because what may be extirpated or threatened in my area may not be threatened or extirpated in your area. There are some plants that you can just get away with just harvesting just the leaves. Let's go back to yarrow, for example. Yarrow is generally very resistant to pests, diseases, and fungus and things. So you can most likely get away with actually just taking a couple of leaves from each yarrow plant. But it's only best to do that if you have multiples of yarrow plants in that area. Another thing to keep in mind whenever you're harvesting is, are you going to be harvesting more than what the plant can reproduce? Because if you are, then right there, that is way more destructive than any other thing that you can do while you are foraging. Let's take a look at spring beauties, for example. Again, like I mentioned those earlier. The corms of the plant is one of the best parts, and honestly, it's one of the best wild edibles I've ever eaten in my entire life, and I've eaten a lot of them. But you have to have the corm. So whenever you find spring beauty plants, you don't just start going amok and start digging up every single root that you can possibly find, or corm that you can possibly find. It's best to actually get a lay of the land, so to speak, to scout the area and to find which areas have the most spring beauty and which have the biggest spring beauties. Spring beauty is extremely slow growing. So if you just go and you dig up 3 acres of spring beauty, it could take 20 or 30 years for that plant population to then grow back. Another plant that we might look at is the trilliums. There are a lot of trillium species, and I've obviously named my channel and my business after the trillium because it's my favorite plant. The leaves of the trilliums are edible in their very early stages. However, if you pick off one leaf off of a plant, you've most likely harmed that colony. And they can be very susceptible to a lot of different types of fungus that can actually take over and kill off the colony slowly over a period of years. So you may not see the damage directly, but it does happen. So whenever you're out foraging and harvesting, make sure you keep in mind that sometimes it's okay to take roots and sometimes it's not. Just because someone else in a video on YouTube or in a book is taking roots doesn't necessarily mean that they're being a destructive forager. So I thought I would make this quick little video just to explain some of this to you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this a little bit, and I'd like to hear your guys' opinions down in the comments below. I thank all of you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.